Hello everyone, I'm going to be taking a slight departure from the format that my videos usually are, but I hope that this will be informative to my constant viewers as well as new viewers to the channel. This was less about the games and more about answering a question that I get quite a bit, but I never really go into while I stream, which is, how am I doing this? The short answer that I give in my streams is that I use a program called AntiMicro that remaps controller buttons as keyboard input, and my YouTube videos have links to the program so people that are curious about it and curious to use it can get started, but other than that, it is pretty alien. And no matter how much I talk about it on stream or in videos, I still kind of feel like I'm doing all of my viewers a disservice by not showing my work. So in this video, I'm going to be pulling back the curtain and showing you all the magic that goes into making my content work. First off, I talk about it all the time. What is AntiMicro? Where can I get it? Like all my other videos, the link's in the description where you can get it, as well as the wiki to give you some tips to get started. It might seem like you need a coding background, but the keywords are really good at stringing together a sentence of sorts, and as long as you're not sleep deprived at 3 a.m., any amount of fiddling can make something happen. At its most basic of functions, AntiMicro will read your controller inputs, and any buttons that you press, it will output them as simple keyboard inputs. For some items, it reads them about how you would expect. It sees my Razer Tartarus as a Razer Tartarus, which is what I use to navigate menus for some of my games, as well as Stepmania. But in the instance of my DDR pad, I'm using a special connector that I pieced together in order to make the pad talk to the PC. A Cobalt Flux pad, which is what this is, uses what's called the DB15 connector. And you can see with these little pins, it kind of looks like it would be a VGA cable, but they are pretty different. With this connector, AntiMicro reads my DDR pad as, well, this. AntiMicro thinks that my DDR pad is really a PS3 controller. With this assumed layout, the pad will obviously have different default assignments, as it only has 9 buttons, while a PS3 controller has 4 symbol buttons, 2 joystick buttons, 2 joysticks, a D-pad, 2 bumpers, and 2 triggers. So how do I know what buttons are what? Well, when you have the interface for AntiMicro, you can press a button down and you'll see the highlight of the button that it detects. As you can see here, up, down, left, and right are Y, B, A, and X, respectively, on an Xbox controller, and triangle, cross, square, and circle on a PlayStation controller. The up left and the up right diagonal buttons are considered the bumpers, or L1 and R1 on a PlayStation controller, and then the down left and down right buttons are considered the triggers, or R2, L2. The center button is also a button, but honestly, I have no idea what it is. Every time I pick up a new game and plug the controller in, it's a different button. Sometimes it treats it as the circle button for canceling, sometimes it's the select button, and sometimes it's the logo button on the middle of your controller that wakes the console up. It's really an adventure every time I play a new game, but thankfully AntiMicro lets me remap, for the most part. Implementing your new controls is as easy as clicking on the button you want to override, and then pressing down the key on the keyboard that you want to replace the action with. This means it works well with emulators because emulators allow you to remap buttons to pretty much anything you want it to be. The decision of where to place the non-directional buttons honestly boiled down to the design of whatever game I decided to play. Every game that I play, I start with the directions on their respective DDR arrows, and then make modifications if I see that I need it. In Kirby's Adventure, the goal of the game was always to the right, and so I would want the button that was most likely to be used for attacking and defending to be as close to the right arrow as possible, which was Kirby's breathing. Now, some games will force controls onto you with no way for you to fix it or bypass it. Final Fantasy IX is one such example that expects a minimum number of buttons present. It already thinks that you're using a D-pad or analog sticks with whatever controller you have plugged in, and even if you try to say, no, I want this to be a keyboard, it knows a controller when it sees a controller, and so it says, I think you clearly must be blind. Here, let me help you. The only way that I found to get around this was to disable the settings in Steam Input, and even then I had to do it every day, and I had to redo all of the settings. It was a mess. I hated it. Another game that would force controls onto you in similar fashion was Undertale. Thankfully, it expected the directional arrows to be where you would want them to be, but it forced the other 4 inputs of menu, confirm, cancel, and full screen to be in specific locations with no way to change it. And it also ignored anything AntiMicro tried to override, and instead it would assume that you wanted to do these inputs in tandem, which meant that if I wanted my confirm and cancel buttons to really read as cancel and confirm, it treated both actions happening simultaneously, where you would confirm then cancel and then confirm, all in one button press. This unfortunate experience wasn't all bad because it led me to the Sans Wall Slams portion of my Undertale adventure, where instead of me saying, hey, replace it with the keyboard, I was actually asking the game, hey, can you do this as well? Now, going into advanced features, there are some that are outlined in the wiki, but I'm gonna go for probably the simplest one to explain first, and that is the set selector. At the bottom of the AntiMicro window, you can see that you can have up to 8 controller sets, which allows you to customize different button layouts all on one controller. By clicking on a controller button and then pressing Advanced, you can go into a section that lets you enable or disable the set selector. This will implement built-in functionality that lets you change a set for as long as you're pressing the button, or it will let you press a button and then press the button to go back to another layout. Just be sure if you do the one-way set selection that on your other set, you have a button that lets you go back. Otherwise, you're gonna have to click on AntiMicro and manually go back anyway, and it's just a lot of work. I use this so that I can put extra buttons that I'm not going to need in the heat of the moment. Using Super Mario World as an example, this would be where I put these start and select buttons, which are buttons that I'm not going to be doing in normal gameplay, it's when I want to pause. Putting it on another set means that I'm never going to fat finger the pause button. That foot? I won't accidentally press it. From here, the controller layout was designed differently from the likes of Kirby's Adventure, because while the goal is similarly to the right, there are 3 important actions instead of just 1, all of which are used offensively and defensively, meaning there was no safe and coordinated way to use the traditional up, down, left, right layout that I had along with other buttons. So I opted for a button layout where my most common buttons were evenly surrounding my center of gravity with a button to swap to a second layout. On the second layout, I made a button for a third set, which were the controls of set 1, but mirrored. As moving left and right in Super Mario World was situated in a vehicular forward/reverse type of setup, this didn't take much work to get used to mirroring my actions. And with this controller layout, I was able to move back and forth between 1, 2, and 3 fluidly. Here's where I get into the customization portion of AntiMicro and we go into complex commands. Instead of going to the set selector, you want to actually stay on the assignments section of the advanced menu. On this menu, there are 13 different functions that can be utilized along with a brief summary of what they're for, and it's actually a lot of information in a very condensed space. The ones that I use most commonly are blank or KBM, release, hold, cycle, and pause. If you can come up with ways to make use of the other commands, by all means experiment with it. I can think of quite a few ways to use the other commands in other applications, but I don't really need them for DDR gaming, so I don't use them. On the wiki, you can see a listing of some of the other combinations that you can plug into the program to make it behave a certain way. The easiest one is combination, where you can tell it to press different buttons at once, allowing for things like pressing the O button and then pressing Shift-O. Macro is another common one, and it does what the name suggests. You can use this to make a macro that repeats button presses with specific time delays in between. I actually used this in Final Fantasy IX when I had to do the Hippol's racing because there was no way that I could spam square and circle fast enough with my feet. Tap and hold has some nice usage, and they even give an example on how this can be useful in a first-person shooter, where you can tap a button to reload your weapon, or you can hold that same button for a specific period of time and you'll hold U's instead. Double tap is another one that is commonly used, where if you press the button, it doesn't do anything, but if you double tap the button within a short time frame, then you'll press the button specified. There can be variants to these as you see fit, like in the case with double tap here. The wiki shows the current layout to be this, which poses a problem thanks to this release command here. With the release command here, whatever you want to do after the cycle timer happens will happen once the button is released, which will result in this happening. Double tap as an action will do nothing until the button is released, where the program will then press dash and left, which kept me running left while I'm not stepping on the button, which isn't what we want. So my personal twist with double tap dash was to remove that last release command. That way I press it once and I move like normal, but if I double tap, it will do the dash and I'll keep moving while the button is held down. You aren't just stuck with doing one of these advanced actions per button either, you can combine them. With Celeste here, I can run in one direction as long as I hold the button down, and if I hold down for a specific bit of time, I'll be holding the grab button and the direction button down. And additionally, if I double tap this same button, I will dash in the desired direction while keeping all other functionality. As a side note, when you have AntiMicro installed, it'll tell you that it's no longer maintained and that AntiMicro X is more up to date. While this is true, there are a couple of quirks that I encountered with AntiMicro X that made me stick with AntiMicro instead. The main one that affected me the most was the difference in cycle assignment. AntiMicro X doesn't let me specify time increments, so in instances where I want to be sure that I double tap within a reasonably quick time frame like 0.2 seconds, it wouldn't accept my changes. It would actually ignore cycle outright. If you're able to make this work, please comment below and let me know, because this was the biggest limiter for me and I might have just been doing something wrong on AntiMicro X. Now, the way that the wiki reads can be a bit confusing, but like I said earlier, if you string it together like a sentence, it actually makes a good bit of sense and also helps you put in additional combinations that really just opens the door for customization. I did you all dirty with my Metal Gear Solid video because I talked a lot about the layout but never really put it on the screen, and I used a lot of these different combinations in that video. My base layout had all of my combat interactions, as it was going to be the most common layout that I'd be using throughout my gameplay. If I tapped upright, it would press R1, and if I held upright for 0.3 seconds, I would hold down R2, which would allow me to cycle through the weapons menu. The way that this interaction looks in AntiMicro is this. But a good way to make sense of it is to circle any commands up to your first keyboard press. In the case here, if I hold upright for this amount of time, I will treat it as R2. Otherwise, if I press the button once inside of this time period, I would treat it as R1. This would let me equip and unequip my primary weapon so that I could muffle footsteps, or unequip weapons that would lock me in first-person view, such as the sniper rifle or the rocket launcher. Square had to be its own button, as I would need square to throw enemies or hold square to choke out enemies and shoot weapons. I used the hold again when I mapped out where to put circle and cross, which were punch and prone respectively. I would never need to hold down circle to punch, so I could hold down that same button to press the cross button in order for me to go prone. Eventually, I had made it so that the center button would be the triangle if I double tapped it. This would let me rest on the center button and also be helpful in niche situations, as triangle in Metal Gear Solid is first person, which would help me look around in difficulties without a radar, or when I need to perform a glitch that would move Snake's hitbox. The second layout would become active if I tapped up left, and it had important stationary interactions on it. Start and select were on the down left button as another hold or tap assignment, and instead of R1 and R2, the upright button was L1 and L2 for the item inventory. I didn't need to actively switch any items, so I could stand still and cycle through whatever I wanted to using left and right, and I never had to worry about accidentally unequipping a keycard or a ration. If I wanted to do something dangerous like the weapon glitch, but I felt I had too low of health, circle was right next to the L2 button, so I could just use rations from the menu. Partway through Metal Gear Solid, I made the decision to do all difficulties and try to perform known skips, and I was having such a rough time fighting Liquid in the final battle, I made a third and fourth set. Set 3 was specifically for the weapon glitch, which is really complex to do, but it was done in my run. It requires throwing a grenade and then going prone. Once damage was received, one would quickly unequip their item, and then look down in first person while spamming the weapon menu, hoping to press R1 on the correct frame. Set 4 was for the Liquid Jeep fight, where you can shoot from the mounted gun while in first person. Sets 2 through 4 would have a one-way set selector that would lead to the next set, allowing me to tap that button to keep cycling, and if at any point I wanted to go back to set 1, I made down right another hold and tap. If I held it down, I'd go back to set 1 once I let go of the button, or else I would tap the button just to go to the next set. Ocarina of Time was the next game on the list, and it utilized what we've already talked about with no other twists other than my set swap button being another hold or tap. The items on the first layout, again, were all things that I would be mainly using. The roll, the sword attack, the target, block, and I would place the slingshot, hookshot, or bow onto C left so that I could aim in the event that my target was too far away for me to use Z to lock on. And that shared a slot with set swap. And now we come to Hollow Knight. Here, the game's design and bodily investment were actually what went into making the control scheme for this game. Whenever people play a game that they're invested in, they put their body into it. You do it, I do it, speedrunners do it. It's kind of like if you ever played a Mario game, you pressed that jump button in really hard, like that was going to make you jump any higher or faster than normal. This, along with the fact that Hollow Knight is a Metroidvania, I knew that my movement was going to be all over the place. I was no longer moving to the right like with Kirby's Adventure or Super Mario World. I was gonna go everywhere. I have to look up and down constantly, as well as attack above me or pogo below me. I knew that I needed to use magic in all directions while I'm also facing in all directions, so this brought up the horrible question, where the hell am I gonna put all these? The stationary actions like inventory and crystal dash I knew to put off on the side for later. I could just fit them into whatever leftover buttons I had on a set. Because I need to attack in all directions, it honestly made sense to put attack on the center button. It being my rest button as well, it doesn't really hurt me holding the button down unless I pick up a nail art. Dear God, I shouldn't have picked up a nail art. So that just makes me ask where to put jump and where to put dash. With Kirby and Mario, it was easy to remember where the jump button was, because you're always moving in a static direction. You're more likely to move left in the overworld than any of the actual levels you were playing. But Hollow Knight's gameplay is omnidirectional, so it's very possible to be caught facing one direction and then needing to flip back around, do some parkour, and now you've got a broken leg waiting to happen. As a result, I made jump up left and up right. This is because when all of us nerds want to jump in a game, we instinctively lean forward hoping to put our energy into the character that we're playing to get all up into the air. Noticing this instinctive behavior led me to design the jump button here, and it made it easy to jump left or right while also doing my previously mentioned actions. However, these buttons aren't the jump button. In reality, they're changing me to another set. On set 2, up left is the jump button, but the up left button on layout 1 is to go to set 2 while you're holding it down. Likewise, up right would be the same thing, but to set 3. As a result, when I press these buttons down, I go to the next set, I'm already pressing the button down, and AntiMicro recognizes this and says, hey, it's time to jump. This allowed me to use the opposite leg to do whatever I wanted combat-wise without killing myself in the process, so long as I timed it correctly. If I jumped left and then needed to jump back right, as long as I timed lifting one foot and pressing with the other, I'd still maintain the altitude. If I want to wall climb, I can swap feet, or I can jump in the same direction that I'm moving and take a nice sip of water as I keep a beat. On sets 2 and 3, the other upper corner would be where I put dash. This would let me hop up any height I wanted and dash, or jump, dash, and then double jump without changing anything. Eventually, I implemented a version of double tap on the left and right arrows, as there were some weird trade-off scenarios that were just frequent enough to warrant this. In some instances, I didn't want to jump dash because I would jump into a spiked roof. There were other instances where I didn't want to use monarch wings, and some other instances I wanted to dash during a full jump, but the time that it would take for me to double tap left or right was too long for me to do any of my actions without receiving repercussions. Kitty corner to whatever the jump button currently is would be the magic button. That way I could jump and then begin my motions to use my skills without negatively impacting my gameplay regardless of what set I was on. Once I acquired the Dream Nail, I realized I had put myself into a bit of a bind as I had already used up most of my buttons and I was almost out of tricks. Watching my VODs back, at no point did I ever heal while I was holding the jump button down, so instead of making the hold on sets 2 and 3 focus, I made it Dream Nail instead. And finally, bringing back inventory and crystal dash, while holding down the set select button, there's absolutely no scenario that would require me to be facing 90 degrees to the right or 90 degrees to the left. As such, the empty back corners on sets 2 and 3 are where I place the inventory and crystal dash buttons as another hold and tap. And with all of this in place, I can put my entire body into playing Hollow Knight. While this does mean that I get a full body workout and I might get tired a bit faster, this makes it so that I'm not getting crippling back pain, which I got from every game that I played except for Hollow Knight and Undertale, because I was getting a full body workout and not just standing in one spot. And well, there you have it. I really hope that this was insightful and educational for those curious individuals that made it this far into the video, and I really hope to see more people picking up AntiMicro. There's so much that you can do with it. I personally believe that it opens up the door to really help with increasing accessibility in gaming. Hope you have a good one, and I'll see you on the next stream or in the next video.